Yes, cats, I hear you. And all of your many complaints. But I am busy. I know. You suffer the tortures of the damned. It's true, it's true. Alright. And we're live. Or at least more or less. We are happening. We are happening. Okay, good. Good to see you. I'm Tad. Still, I keep applying to the government for something different. Nobody wants to help. But there you go. And good to see you. Nice to spend some time with you. It is Sunday. It is 1 a.m. here in, it was fairly sunny California today. As you can hear, it was sunny enough that the cats are all running around in here trying to find things to do. I mentioned, nope, no one up there right now. I have mentioned several times now that one cat has moved out of my life, and two more cats have moved in. So I'm not complaining. I like animals. Even people, usually. Well, not usually. Yeah, usually. There is a difference, of course, between merely liking people as a group and liking people in casual interactions, than finding true friends and soulmates and people that you really care about. And I would never want to imply otherwise. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's been a long day, and it will be another long day tomorrow. And then after that, we're expecting 24 hours for each of them all week long. So, what am I going to tell you about? I don't really have much as usual. I'm copy editing Navigator's Children, and of course, even as I'm doing that, my beloved publisher, Betsy, sent me a book to read, which they have a deadline on for getting any quotes or anything in it. It's a book to read for me to see if I would like to quote, and I am going to quote. It's an excellent book. It's I'm envious. As anybody is when somebody watches young people, or younger people, I should say. I don't think the writer of this book in question is necessarily all that young, but younger people finding the flowering of their talent, and on the one hand, one is always pleased to be able to help in some way, just recognizing somebody who's really good at something and passing it along. If you'll notice, I'm not telling you the name yet. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say or not say about the book. I'll talk to you guys about it when it's officially published and available. But it's very good. I'm really enjoying it. And but I don't have much time to read it, so I spent most of today, instead of writing, I spent most of today reading, which is a weird feeling for me, I have to say, because I actually had cleared the day of other possible duties and said, I'm going to work today. And then last night I got this message saying, essentially, you have till Monday to be able to blurb this book. And, it's too good a book not to. So I've been putting in a huge amount of time. Not that it's difficult. As I said, it's a really good book. But just there's a part of me that always feels that a day when I could have worked and could have written and don't write is a waste. And that part of me is not always entirely rational. Oh! Good Lord. You guys must have been going, why is Tad so quiet? If you're even saying it. Let me go check. I'm sure you're all saying, what the hell's going on with Tad? Probably. Yeah, all the... Okay. I'm so sorry. I did it again. Thank God I only did it for 4 minutes this time. I am so sorry. No, that was completely my fault. I was doing other things right up to the moment that I started. I'm sorry. I was doing things right up to the moment I started, and I just completely forgot to pull the microphone out where it would do its job properly. It got later faster than I thought it would. Many apologies. What I was saying was largely gibberish. Just to repeat quickly and more concisely, working on the Navigator's Children, babysitting, cat sitting. The couldn't do Navigator's Children today because my publisher told me this book we're hoping to get a quote from you on, which, as I said, also is really good and deserves a quote. The deadline is Monday, and I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was supposed to be working on the copy editing proofs. So I've been reading all day today, which on the one hand I enjoyed because it's a very fine book, and when it's available for purchase, I will absolutely tell people about it. But I'm not going to right now. But I was also, saying how frustrating in a way it is to have a working day set aside for writing and then be reading instead. It feels like consumption, even though it's semi-work related. Anyway, sorry about that. My mistake. This will be another in the hall of stupid Tad readings, in the sense of like something dumb happening. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let me say hello to anybody who showed up, probably mostly to tell me your microphone's not on. So Tash is there. Isaac, hello, Isaac. Andre, I see, yes, and Kristen. Hi, Kristen. Hi, Jeremy. Jeremy, my friend, is here. Mahmoud, good to see you, sir. Ilva, another dear friend. Hello, Ilva. Chris, thank you, Chris, as always. Dirk, hello. Wouter, Sandra, Iris, Mark. God, look at the whole gang here. Christy, Sandra. Oh, that's a different Sandra, isn't it? Yes, that is a different. That's maybe Sandra. And Nicole, Penny, and Nikki. I see all of those people. Who else have I not seen? Deb. I see a Deb here. Deb Gates. Okay. Hello. Good to see you. Anyway, so that's the basic, that is the nub. That is the general thing going on. As I tried to mention, I am now cat plein de chat at the moment, as the French say. And these are young cats. So unlike Lily, who basically you couldn't move her with a crowbar and a wheelbarrow most of the time. These are quite active cats, especially since one of them is still actively avoiding me. Not always. He lets me pet him sometimes, but quite frequently he's going, oh my God, it's a cat killer. I'm positive it is. He looks like he must be. I'm sure I better run over here, and he, off to the back. And then later on, he'll be just like lying on top of something. This is the black cat. And I'll go over to pet him, and he'll like, whoa, what took you so long? I'm like, weren't you the one who was just fleeing for your life? Like somebody in a Japanese monster movie just a few minutes ago? Oh, we must run. Here comes that man with no hair. I mean, the other one's fine. He's like totally down with me now. He's like, yeah, I know that guy. He's not good for much, but you can get a scritch out of him now and then. Anyway, so obviously my brain is shot. It's sudden change of gear from writing and editing to reading and just trying to think about what can I say that's helpful, but also is indicative of having actually appreciated the book. So there's like a divide that way between wanting to communicate with the writer and say why you liked it in the blurb, but also thinking, but the publishers will want something short and sweet that they can hammer on the cover if they think it's worthwhile. And so if I'm going to do the writer a service, and this writer deserves it because it's a good book, then I'm going to have to think of a way to make it concise and maybe even, I can't even think of the word I want. Like slogan-y. Who knows? Because that's really what a blurb should be. It should be quick, at least if it's one kind that's going on the cover of a book. It should be quick, it should be to the point, and it should make people want to at least read the book, pick it up, open it, look at it, see what you think about it. I was thinking about this tonight, now that I'm talking still. I was thinking about this tonight because I was thinking, Deb and I were watching Pride and Prejudice. And not the first version we saw together, which was the BBC version with Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth and that cast. But this is the more recent Hollywood version with Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden and various other great and glorious, British alumni that you all know, Judi Dench, people like that. Tom Hollander, who we're also watching in this Truman Capote thing, who is wonderful as the unctuous Mr. Collins, one of the most disgustingly unctuous characters since Uriah Heep actually became a word, a byword for it back in Dickens' day. But anyway, so we were watching this, and there was a scene where Keira Knightley, who plays Elizabeth, is off with a book walking through the fields, and then there's another scene later on. I mean, this is all appropriate because the whole point about Elizabeth is that she's a bookish person. She doesn't hesitate to speak her mind, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and part of that comes from the fact that she is well read. She is a very smart young woman in a society without many options for her. But anyway, as I was watching it, I was going like, wow, you know, just think about how slow and focused certain kinds of input were in those days, and how important books were. I mean, this is obviously takes place in the Regency era, early 19th century. You know, how fundamentally crucial, you know, no radio, no TV, no movies, no, obviously no internet. You know, the only way you got information was either from other people telling you or from reading. Very infrequently, you know, if you were lucky, it wouldn't happen for many. If you were a woman, you know, you might go to school and get information there. But what a potent source of experience reading was. And that era kind of, it didn't end, obviously. We're still in it. People still read, still buy books, thank God, because that's how I make my living. And what little self-esteem I have comes from books, to an extent, comes from books as well. But just the change, the immense change, and you know, both on the one hand, the recognition of how important the written word is to human civilization and to human communication, and you know, just it's almost incalculable. But at the same time, how things are changing, and there's a part of me that goes, you know, if I knew how the world would be right now, would I have still gone into writing? Because, as some of you know already, I did not set out to be a writer. I was not somebody who grew up going, well, I'm going to be a writer no matter what. You know, I had a lot of other things. First, I thought I was going to be an archaeologist. Then I found out there was a lot of work involved in that. You didn't simply part your bedroom curtains in the morning and find that you were on the edge of an amazing lost civilization that then you'd be able to explore, and that actually you'd spend most of your time digging up little pieces of ceramic. And I am not a lazy person, but I don't know if I'm patient enough for that. I'm fascinated by it, but that's when I can take it at a remove and ingest a great deal of the information without having to do the actual backbreaking work. Anyway, so I went quickly from there to being wanting to be a rock and roll star, and you know, and I had many other. After that sort of faded into the background, I wanted to be something in the arts, just because I was interested in a lot of the arts. I did, you know, illustration and cartooning, started to do a little painting, played some music, did a lot of theater, did radio for several years. Writing was actually a fairly late thing for me. And I didn't just jump right into it. And in fact, it happened in part because I lived with a professional writer in the same fourplex. And for you non-Americans, I don't know if you have that term. It means an apartment building that's only 4 apartments. You know, it's a small, cozy little one. But anyway, so our across the hall neighbor was a professional writer, and he actually was teaching at Stanford. He's actually a very good writer, Ron Hansen. He wrote the book that the movie The Assassination of Jesse James is based on, and quite a few other very fine books, several of them Westerns, but not all of them. And anyway, and Ron was a really good writer, and he actually was teaching writing at Stanford. But I kind of had this I don't see a big difference between Ron's approach to creativity and my own, or his ability to see the world in my own. And I began to think about writing, and I'll tell you the whole story of how I got into it some other time, because that will take me like 10, 15 minutes to kind of explain that period. But suffice it to say, that was something I tried at the same time or after I had done several other things. And it was the first of the arts in which I was engaged that actually turned into something long-term professional, in the sense that I sold my first book, Tail Chaser's Song, and my publishers, who are still my publishers, or publisher now that Sheila has retired, Betsy Walheim, and at the time her dad, Donald A. Walheim, sent me a letter and saying, we want to buy the book. And then a little while later they said, what else would you like to write? And I said, an 18th dynasty Egyptian historical novel. And they looked at me like I had just peed on the carpet, metaphorically speaking. And so they pointed out to me that they were publishers of science fiction and fantasy, and that they were basically offering me another contract. And did I really think I wanted to do a historical novel and have to start over again? And I said, no, that's a heck of a good point. I see the logic of what you're saying. Yes, I can think of some fantasy stuff I would like to write. I told them, I said, I've always been a little troubled by some things about Tolkien, the way that people treat Tolkien's work and stuff, and I would like to write something that is in part a commentary on that, but of course is a story in its own right, and that wound up being the Dragonbone Chair. But it was not my first choice, and I can't even remember now how I got off on this long tangent, except that I was talking about the fact that I didn't set out to be a writer. Oh, yeah, I remember. So, yes, I tangent like I write. Long, elaborate circles that eventually cross back into the center again. So I was not setting out to be a writer, and there's still times it seems a little puzzling to me that I am a writer, but the reason I started to say this is there are also times when I go, would I do it again if I had the chance to do something else again? If I started over and I knew that publishing was going to change as much as it changed and all that. Well, first of all, obviously I would still want to be somehow involved in writing, because I would want to make sure that I still met my wife, Deborah. That would be the most important thing, and I wouldn't want to give that up. But the other thing was that I also realized that what's worked in the early 19th century, during the Regency period, what worked in the Regency period still works about the written word, and that is that it is a deeply transactional process between writer and reader. And I know, because I'm a reader as well as a writer, it's a deeply transactional process. And what you are doing is you are shaping the reader's experience. You are handing them enough information to build the world in their head, or build the scene in their head, or build the character in their head, or characters. But it requires a give and take. If you really want to write in a successful, engaging manner, you have to realize that the reader needs to be involved. If you tell them everything, if you do everything, if you push them along, if you nudge them, if you elbow them and go, look at this, at a certain point, you're not engaging them. You're actually pushing them away. But if you let them work with you, if you let the reader bring their share to the dance, then it does become a dance. It truly becomes an interactive process. The most interactive process I think that there is. I don't think there's anything more interactive than reading. And especially when that reading is an attempt to convey to us something that we don't already know, or something we haven't or maybe even can't actually experience. So that's all I wanted to say. That was a great deal of chit-chat. And a great deal of wandering, but I think I've summed it all up now. Thank you for indulging me. Okay, so now we are going back to the Witchwood Crown. All right, I won't babble anymore. I promise I will read. So we're going back to the Witchwood Crown. So at this point, everybody, of course, is back at the Hayholt. The Royal Progress up to Rimmersgard and back, and all those things are in the, excuse the expression since it doesn't really go with the milieu, but in the rear view mirror. And because of that, what we're concentrating on at the moment is things happening around the Hayholt. And we've just been reading a scene where Tiamak, the advisor, obviously, the advisor from the Ran, and his wife Thalia, who is a former nun from Naban, are back together after a long day. And I believe T-Mac just came in, but anything. So that's where we are. So I'm continuing to read from The Witchwood Crown. Tiamat sighed. I feel much the same, both with her and several other matters. I have felt this way for weeks now. It is like watching the surface of a stream back home in my younger days. There are ripples I do not understand. It might be only rocks beneath the water, or it might be something moving. What troubles you? Oh, everything and nothing. Too much to tell just now. Then I will leave you to think in silence if you will only do me one kindness. And that is, pour me a cup of the yellow duck cordial, will you? I am so weary today, and my head is aching. A whole cup? Very well, half a cup. I will drink it slowly. She frowned at him, but it was meant to be playful. You are too cautious with me, Timo. We Drylander women are sturdy too, you know. Oh, that I know. He uncorked the small jug and poured a generous measure into one of their precious glass cups, then held it up to the afternoon sun, spilling through the window. It was a large window, and the primary reason Tiamat had chosen these rooms, which were otherwise less than grand, but he missed the light of his previous existence more than anything else. He gave the cup a shake and watched the cloudy liquid swirl like an unsettled sky. Thank you, husband, Thalia said as she took it. He left her with her drink and went to the table. What he was about to do had been in his head since Eitan had first shown him the forbidden book. Tiamat had realized immediately upon seeing the etheric whispers that he would need advice from another scholar, but the League was nothing like what it had been. Only 3 scroll-bearers left, and that was if Fiera still lived. He had been considering Eitan as a new scroll-bearer because of the young monk's active mind and good heart, but he was someone to be trained into the League and groomed as a scholar, not someone who could immediately step in and help. And help was what Tiamat truly needed just now. His wife was reading Sarchun's On the Movement of Blood and Pneuma as she sipped her cordial, which suggested she was still worrying over the dying Sitha. Thalia seemed to think of little else since his return from the Royal Progress, and came back to their rooms most days only to use one of their books of physic or to sleep. Tiamat was not the most demanding husband, but he was beginning to feel a bit jealous toward the poisoned woman who was getting all his wife's attention. No good brooding, he told himself. Instead, I should thank he who always steps on sand that Thalia is alive and well, and that we are both here together. And my energies could be better used too. He took a sheet of parchment out of the writing box, cut a quill for use, and began writing. My dear friend, Angus, he began, then worried briefly that it was too informal. He decided he would leave it as it was. I send you this letter because I have a need for your knowledge that outweighs the shame of distracting you from your life and work. A most unusual book has come into my possession, a book that neither you nor I have ever seen but only heard of, a thing of great infamy. That said, I would not trouble you even so, except that I fear its contents may have bearing on other important matters. The book is mostly written in Old Nabani, which is straightforward enough, but as a kind of code, the author, I will not use his name here, but you will know it as you will know of the book, uses Kandian words in place of the most important names and processes. I know little of the language of Kandia. You do, however. I trust you can see the shape of my dilemma. This book cannot be sent unless I were to carry it myself, which is impossible just now, as my duties here in Urchester prevent it. I do not ask you to come. I know it is too much to ask anyone in your condition, but I have no other ideas.
Do you know anyone else who could help me, old friend? Are there scholars outside the Adonite Church who know something of the Khan's ancient tongue? If you have guessed the name of this book, you have also guessed why I cannot go to the Sansellan Adonitis for help, and why I cannot say more in a letter which must be entrusted to a messenger, even a royal messenger. I hope this finds you as well as can be, and that your work goes well. Whatever your answer to this query, I will look forward to your writings on Werensten and the ruins of Kementari. Signed, your brother in spirit, Tiamat of the village grove, now of Urchester. He read it over, then blotted it and folded it before applying his seal. He would put it in the next southbound post himself to make certain it stayed secret. It would likely come to nothing. Angus was notoriously uninterested in other people's work. But Tiamat felt the need to do something, anything. Since the day that fearful premonition had swept over as they journeyed across the frost march, he had been haunted by an inexplicable feeling that his time was now short, that something was about to disrupt everything that had been ordinary in his and Thalia's lives, like a large rock dropped into a small pond. May the elders grant that I am as poor at seeing the future as I am at reading Khandian, he prayed. But it provoked a sudden worrying thought. What am I sending Brother Eitan into? Should I go myself instead? Such questions had no simple answers, of course, none that any but the gods could know. Tiamat kissed his wife on the top of her head as he headed toward the door, then saw that the cordial glass was almost dropping from her fingers. She had fallen asleep, with Sarchun still open on her lap. He removed the book and then took the glass, which fortunately was all but empty, and set both on the table before he left. Sleep well, dearest wife, he whispered as he closed the door. Sleep safe. Chapter 30. The Slow Game. They rode northeast over the wide plain the Rimmersmen called Osterdeer. Forest to the north, and the lake, wide as the sea, stretching for miles beside them on the south, making their way out of the southern springtime and into snows that would not melt until much later in the year. Mako was pleased by their escape from what he called the mortal's trap, but when Kemi said, for the second time in as many hours, 4 talons and a giant, but we killed dozens of their best, the chieftain stared at him in displeasure. The queen would expect no less sacrifice, was all he said, but Keme did not speak of it again afterward. Still, Mako was pleased by what had happened, and during those long days of riding he did not go out of his way to make Nezeru's life any more miserable than he had before, though he still treated her with contempt. Storm after storm blew through the gap, but bad weather was never much of a discouragement to the Hikedaya, and because this bleak part of the northern world was almost uninhabited, the Queen's Hand could ride toward the distant peak called Jinyahaywa in daylight as well as darkness. But Mako had not lost all caution. The mortal Jarnulf knew the territory better than did any of the Hikedaya, and was consulted frequently, but he was never allowed to lead the hand, or even ride at the front. Mako took that place himself, behind only the giant Gogamgar, whose task it was to clear the way when the snow lay piled too deep for their horses to pass. Keme and Saomeji rode with the chieftain, and were close in his counsels as well. Thus it was that Nezeru and the mortal became the endmost riders of the small company. Jarnul slowed his horse in a way that Nezeru knew she was not supposed to notice. She guessed that he sought to speak with her because she was in disgrace, and would try to draw her out with the idea of making her an ally. The other Hikedaya all suspected the moral's motives, and in this, at least, Nezeru agreed with them. Queen's huntsmen were known to be solitary and cruel, as well as murderously proud of their freedom when the rest of their brethren were collared slaves. It seemed hard to believe that one of the huntsmen would so lightly join his fortune with a party of talons. So, Sacrifice Nezaru, Jarnulf said abruptly. How do you come here? It still seemed strange that someone who looked so alien could speak her mother tongue so flawlessly. He even made the secondary K sound as well as the Hikadaya themselves on the inward breath instead of the outward. And his grasp of subtleties was good, too, asking her how she had come instead of why, which had the sound of interrogation. The Queen sent me. How do you come here, freedman Jarnulf? She asked. He smiled, recognizing, as she had, that it was to be a long, slow game, one that could last for days. In this land of endless snowy plains, of gray-white skies and stunted forests of dark, gnarled trees, nobody was in a hurry. I come out of the slave pens of Nakiga, of course, he said. Nakiga that was, to be more precise. The old city outside the mountain. I was born in White Snail Castle, at the foot of Stormspike, and I was taught from the time I could draw breath to fear the Queen. So, in that way, no different from you. Except I wore no slave collar, and I was taught not to fear her, but to love her. It comes to much the same. His look was mocking. And I knew you were not born in the slave pen sacrifice. That is obvious in your every movement. What do you mean? The hue of your skin and the shape of your face tell me you are a half-blood, but you move like one raised among Nakiga's nobility. Am I right? You are, she said, nettled by the accuracy of his guess. Is there more that you can see of my past merely by looking, Queen's huntsman? He showed the hint of another self-satisfied smile. Mortals, even this one, were so over-generous with their thoughts, Nezaru. Their faces were like books with everything written there. It is not only your proud posture. It tells me you were raised in a noble house before you joined your order, he said. You clearly learned the Hausarashi, the way of the exiles that is taught to children of the higher clans. And the stiffness with which you still perform some of the gestures tell me it is not long since you left the house of your childhood. How so? As your people grow older, their performance of the ancient gestures grows smoother and less careful. Among the eldest, in the Queen's land-born advisors, for instance, it is impossible to tell that they have ever expressed themselves or moved in any other way. Nezaru was a bit taken aback. Whatever else he might be, this mortal was no fool. But she was also beginning to enjoy the game. Let me tell you something about yourself, then, she said. You had a teacher, the sort that slaves do not usually have. You learned the fighting arts and even horsemanship before you left the slave life, and you have tried to unlearn the same sort of rote gestures you mock in me, at least enough to pass for an ordinary rimmersman among your own kind. She was gratified by a slight shift at the edge of his mouth, a strike. Now, why would you do such a thing, try to disguise how you were raised? I give you honor, sacrificed Nezaru. Your eye is keen, although I had spoken of my teacher Shoka before. But the reason I had to unlearn the gestures, taught me as a child slave, should be obvious. As one of the Queen's huntsmen, I ranged the whole of these lands, from the border of her domain down into Rimmersgard, and occasionally, as this time, all the way into the northern reaches of Erkenland. I must deal with other mortals that I meet in my travels, and I often trade in their villages. What do you think I would receive instead of jerked meat and grain if they knew I was one of Queen Utuku's slave catchers? A noose, perhaps, and an iron cage for your bones. Now she smiled with a conscious desire to show him how pleasant it would be to see him thus. I hear that the bodies of traitors are often hung along the borders of the mortal lands to show what the rest of your kind think of those who've taken the Queen's silver, as they say. Exactly. They rode in silence for a while. Far ahead, Nezeru could see the humped silhouette of the giant, like a moving snowdrift. Behind him, Mako spoke with Sao Meiji, with Keme following a little way behind. More and more in these last days, the chieftain and the singer seemed to be in deep conversation, often arguing, and Nezeru wished she knew why. She also wondered why Sao Meiji's master, Akanabi, had allowed her to remain with this hand when Mako had wanted her sent back to Nakiga for punishment. Their mission was important, of course, for surely the Lord of Song could have picked any one of dozens. But surely the Lord of Song could have picked any one of dozens to replace her from his own entourage of singers and sacrifice-trained guards. And Akanabi, in the plundering of her thoughts, could not have failed to learn that she had lied about being with child. Why had that also been ignored? Certainly the arch singer had not informed Mako, who still clearly believed her lie. If I am right, as I think I am, that you are young for your kind, Jarnolf said abruptly, as if he had been listening to her thoughts, how have you come to join this grave undertaking, whatever it may be? I was top of my file in the order of sacrifice. She could hear the tightness in her own voice and was unhappy with herself. Was it so obvious that she too had wondered at the same thing? I killed 6 armed slaves with my bare hands. I crippled 2 rival sacrifices in the games. I can fight as well as any male and better than most. Oh, I am certain, he said, but still files pass through the order of sacrifice every few years, don't they? There must have been dozens of other warriors who reached equally high rank in their own time and who have been blooded since in actual battle. Because you have not been in real battle before our fight with the Erkenlanders, have you? She was surprised by how that stung her. A bad guess, mortal. I have been in many fights, many struggles, she said, almost too quickly, thinking of the islanders she had slaughtered, but also of the one she had let escape. Ah. Irritatingly, he acted as though she had agreed with him. So who are your parents' sacrifice? They must be powerful indeed to secure such an important posting for their daughter while she is still so young. My youth means nothing. Really? It certainly means something to me. Your people lived to be 100 times as old as mine, and yet I would wager that despite your high position and honors, I have lived longer than you have in this world beneath these stars. He spread his fingers toward the night sky. I have seen 28 summers. How many have you seen? Meaningless. She kept her face immobile, but now she wanted to kill him and silence his mockery. You jab at me so you do not have to answer any questions of your own. The pale blue eyes surveyed her. Then I apologize. I suppose, in a way, I am a guest and should be better behaved. Question away, Sacrifice. Is there something about me that warrants your interest? Interest? Perhaps. Nezeru knew she had lost her calm. She silently repeated the prayer of loyal servants until she could think with her customary clarity. Your arrows are different than ours, she said at last. He raised his eyebrows in feigned surprise. Well, that is certainly cause for concern. Not in and of itself, no, but yours are fletched with hawk or eagle feathers. We sacrifices use feathers from the black goose. Do you want a contest, then, to see whose arrows fly most truly? I may not be Hikataya, but nobody has yet complained of my skill with a bow. I do not seek a contest, although it might be interesting to have such a thing one day, you and I. Now she allowed herself to smile just a little. It felt like power, like lifting her cloak to display a sharp blade. But I followed you down the hill. That night we escaped the mortal army, and I saw many arrows with that fletching. They were all sticking into trees. For a moment he rode in silence. I'm afraid I don't understand you, Sacrifice. Oh, I think you do, freedman. For someone who professes to be a skilled archer, you seem to have hit very few mortal targets. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. Yes, that was a cat going past. He dismissed it with a shake of his head. The hills were full of mortals that night. They were all around us before we broke for freedom. Surely I am not responsible for every arrow that was not feathered with black goose? No. But few of our mortal enemies would have been shooting from behind us, so I still have trouble understanding how so many arrows in the line of our downhill charge would have missed their target, unless the trees were the target. The mortal's face was a mask as blank as that of any Hikedaya at his or her duty. Do you have a point, Sacrifice? Call me Nezeru, please. I think we have passed that stage of formality, don't you? After all, we have fought together, killed mortals together, and now we ride together, and I will call you Jarnulf. Or is that not your true name? As true as any. He looked at her with what she gauged to be a little more respect than previously. But you still have not answered my question. Who gave you your mortal blood? She considered a moment. My mother. She is of Rimmersgard, like you. A slave also, like me and the rest of my family. Not exactly. And that was true. There really was no precedent for the relationship between Nezeru's noble father and her outlander mother. But I think she would recognize much of your life. I hope not, Lady Nezeru, because I would not wish my life on anyone. Suddenly, surprisingly, he spurred his horse ahead and did not slow until he had reached a position halfway between Nezeru and the leaders of the company. Yes, she thought, not without pleasure. It will be a long, slow game with this one. New section. His earliest memories were of the cold, of huddling in the slave barracks with the other children. The winds that descended from the Nornfells and swirled around Great Storm Spike seemed always to be in motion, always searching for a way into the crude buildings, and their whistling song haunted his childhood. Even crushed in with other shivering children, even crushed in with other shivering children, thin bodies pressed together like mouselings in a nest of rags, Jarnulf was never warm. He remembered the cold and, of course, the hunger. The Hikedaya did not consider children fit for any but the lightest of labors until they had reached a certain size, usually at about 10 years of age, so they did not concern themselves overmuch with feeding the slaves' offspring. Those who showed themselves strong enough to survive would be worth keeping, but those that did not were a waste of good grain, so children were given just enough thin gruel to keep them alive. If some of the larger took food from the smaller, it only proved the stronger were more worthy of life and would bring their owners more value. The sickly were left to die. For centuries that had been the way among the Hikedaya with their own children. Why should the spawn of mortal slaves be treated any differently? Jarnulf had known his mother Ragna for only a few years of his young life, and although he felt certain he still remembered her face, he could never quite be sure. What he did remember was her voice, one of the few gentle things of his childhood, lovely, soft, and sweet as birdsong. Her quiet words as they huddled together at night, trying not to wake the others, were his only memories of comfort. She told him stories of her family and of his people, and even taught him the rudiments of reading and writing and the old runes their ancestors had brought across the ocean to Ostenard. But when he was only 8 years old, his brother, Jarn Grimner, a year younger, and his sister Gret, barely 4 years of age, Another female slave died, and their mother was moved into the castle to replace her. Yarnulf and his brother and sister never saw her again. For the younger ones, Jarnulf did his best to take her place, especially for little Gret, wrapping the child in his arms as the long nights crept past, and the wind tugged and probed at the cracks in the cold stone buildings the Hikedaya called the slave barns. Some nights Gret shivered for hours, even in her sleep. His brothers suffered too, and in the first winter after their mother left, Jarngrimnir died of the sweating sickness, and his body was carted away to the field of the Nameless to be burned. The slave barns and the slaves themselves belonged to White Snail Castle, one of the last great estates still remaining in Nakiga that was the city outside the mountain, which had once spread far beyond the base of Great Stormspike. The old city had been a miracle of fluted stone and wide causeways, of great stone houses and walls, but now it was largely fallen into ruin. Still, a few of the older families had refused to withdraw inside the mountain. They kept to the old ways, living in the ancient Gearfalcon castles perched on the mountainside, supervising their own slaves and bound farmers instead of leaving the work to overseers who were slaves themselves. The masters of White Snail Castle and the other outside estates raised sheep and cattle and horses on the terraced hillsides of Stormspike's eastern foothills, living the way their ancestors had when they first came to this land of exile they called Dese Ne Sogeu, the Shadow Garden. Jarnulf had gained more from his mother and his long-lost father than merely his slender, strong build, his height, and his knowledge of the old runes. His mother had also taught him to watch and to think, had showed him the way to defeat strength was not always simply to be stronger. "Do not mistake me," she had told him more than once. "We are strong, too, even though we are slaves. Remember, we come of the Yarn clan, the Iron clan, and the fairies have always hated iron and feared its power." Again and again Ragnar had insisted he learn to keep his temper, reminded him that there were other ways to fight, even to win. "Cleverness can save you where strength or size cannot," she had told him, illustrating it with the story of how the fire god Loken once tricked the king of the ogres. "Patience can do it too, because time can do what men cannot." Jarnulf had liked that story in particular because he knew about giants. He often saw the massive creatures at work. The Hikedaya called them Raoni, moving heavy rocks and beams for their masters, because the giants were slaves just like Jarnulf. Seeing them, he had realized that there were some enemies he would never be strong enough to fight, and it was a lesson he would not forget. Thus, when their mother was taken away to be a house slave instead of attacking the Hikedaya overseers who came for her, young Jarnulf had held in his anger until he felt scorched inside, but had said and done nothing. "Cleverness can do it," he had told himself over and over, though his blood seemed to boil inside him. "Patience can also do it," he had thought, clutching the favorite saying of Ragnar's even as she was led away, not even allowed to look back, "because time can do what men cannot." But it had been a bitter day, and the wound had never healed. As he had grown older, he had begun to be chosen for the sort of jobs that the Hikedaya gave to young slaves, cutting black barley on the steep hillsides until his skin itched all over, and carrying water to the harvesters, rubbish to the midden, and night soil to the fields. In this way, he began to come into contact with the children of his Hikedaya masters. The estate that surrounded White Snail Castle was like a little city and housed many kinds of people. The giants and the changeling creatures called Pengi seemed little more than animals and were considered lower even than Jarnulf and his mortal kind. But several castes of Hikedaya lived in the castle as well, the bound, the pledged, and the recognized. The bound were the farmers, who had only a little more freedom than the slaves, but were still Hikedaya. Even the meanest and lowest of them had life or death power over any mortal. The pledged were the master's soldiers and other important servants and functionaries. And, of course, the master and his family were of the recognized, the caste of those who had been confirmed in the ranks of nobility by the queen herself. Jarnolf hardly ever saw the children of the recognized who were raised and educated in the castle's great keep, but the young sons and daughters of the pledged came every day to a fallow field near the slave barns, a place put aside for the purpose of training them in the arts of war, since all Hikedaya except the bound were taught to fight. At first Jarnolf only watched them when he could snatch a moment of freedom. He was especially fascinated by the old sharp-faced Hikedaya who supervised them. It was hard to guess the years of Jarnolf's masters, who did not age as mortals did, but this teacher moved with a certain lack of hurry that suggested experience, and he did not leave his hair white, as most of the other men did, but colored it a shade of witchwood gray that had fallen from fashion long before Jarnolf or even his grandparents had been born. He learned that the old man was a famous swordsman, and one-time sacrifice commander named Denabi Se Shoka. None of the other slaves knew much more than that about him, but everyone on the estate could hear his piercing voice as he shouted, directed, and mocked his students. Hikedaya youth only a little older and bigger than Jarnolf himself. The young slave was grateful for that voice, which he could hear even at a distance, and which allowed him to memorize most of what the old warrior was telling his charges. Soon Jarnolf had begun hurrying through whatever work he was given so that he could steal a few moments near the edge of the training field, watching the young Hikedaya learn to wield sword and spear and shoot a bow. After a while, frustrated by having no weapon of his own, Jarnolf sat up nights after his sister had fallen asleep and made himself a wooden sword from scraps, tying stones to it with stolen twine to give it enough weight for proper practice. He kept it hidden in a stand of birch trees near the training ground, and would lurk in their shade, blocked, as he thought, from the view of the young warriors at work, and imitate what they were being taught. When the keen-eyed Hikedaya students finally noticed him, as had been more or less inevitable, retribution was swift and painful. A half-dozen of them broke away from the main group and ran toward him. Before Jarnolf could get away, they vaulted the fence and surrounded him. For a few moments, he held them at bay, whirling his wooden blade and dodging their first attacks, but before long they moved in close and overwhelmed him with numbers. They beat him with the flats of their swords until he fell to the ground, then beat him some more, and ended by kicking his limp form until he thought he would die from pain and lack of breath. At last they lost interest. After breaking his wooden sword and scattering the pieces over him like funeral flowers, the children of his masters wandered back to their practice. Jarnolf lay for a long time with his belly against the ground and his face in the cold, wet dirt, wanting to get up, or at least to crawl off and hide his shame. But his ribs were aching so badly that he could not push himself upright. He felt the sun move across the sky and knew that if he could not climb to his feet, he would lie out all night, and that would mean death. But every moment seemed to grind something broken inside of him against something else equally damaged. He wept silently as the wind began to increase. "By the garden, what is lying here?" The voice was cheerful but mocking. "Is it a little mouse that the cat has played with? Poor mouse, happy cat." Jarnolf tried to roll over to see who was talking, but the pain was too great. "Or is it a fish that has climbed out of Lake Rumia and tried to walk like an animal? How strange to find a fish so far from water." It was maddening. Jarnolf pulled his knees underneath himself, letting out a gasp of agony as he felt all the bruised places, the cracked places. He choked down a cry. It came out as a gurgle from behind his clenched teeth, and at last managed to push himself up to where he could see who was talking. It was Shokai himself, the old warrior who trained the pledged, staring down at him with an amused look. Older Hikidaya had much the same appearance as younger, but the effects of centuries of sun and wind showed up at last even on their near-ageless faces. Shoka was less fine-featured than younger male Hikidaya, as though his face had been carved with blunt, crude tools. Jarnolf crouched on his hands and knees. It was hard to hold his head up. "Do you have a name, little mouse, little fish?" the weapons master asked. "Or are you a dog? You look like a dog down on all fours that way. Why should this important fellow go out of his way to mock a dying slave?" Jarnolf kept his mouth closed. "But your tail is not wagging," said Shoka. "I will call you Sanakuno, sad little dog." He walked closer. The swordsman wore the loose black garb of a soldier, but with no signs of rank, and his white feet were bare. One of his slender, calloused hands probed along Jarnolf's side, feeling the damage where the students had kicked him over and over again. "I like dogs," Shoka said, "especially dogs with spirit. I will offer you a bargain. If you can get yourself back to the slave quarters tonight, and come to me tomorrow after your work is finished, I will teach you how to bite the way a dog should. Would you like that?" Jarnolf did not understand him. "Bite?" He kept silent. "Or you may stay here. Nobody else will help you, as you should know. Here strays are left to die." And so saying, the old Hikidaya turned and walked back toward the practice field. The sun was long gone behind the great mountain by the time Jarnolf finally managed to get onto his feet and began staggering back to the slave barracks. He shivered through the night, the cold so fierce that when he finally slept, he dreamed that he had died, that he lay beside his brother Jarngrimnir on a burning funeral boat like their ancient ancestors. But the next day he dragged himself up from bed when the summoning bell rang and limped out to his work. Zue Shoka was waiting for him, as he said he would be. The old master said nothing, only threw Jarnolf a practice sword and commanded, "Show me the 12 starting positions, Sanakuno." From that hour forward, Jarnolf had a teacher. The lessons were only when the old swordsman was in the mood. It did not happen every day, at least at first, but often enough that Jarnolf always had something new to practice at night when the other slaves were asleep. He again took to sneaking from the barracks so he could practice his movements with the wooden sword he hid in the trees near the slave barn. With a wooden sword he hid in the trees near the slave barn. Even the coldest weather would find him out of doors, working through the silent dance of attack and defense, his feet and hands turning blue from the chill. Some nights he barely made it back into his bed before the bell rang, summoning him out to work once more. Shoka never said so, but he seemed impressed by the boy's capacity to learn and the diligence with which he worked. Still, he treated Jarnolf at least as roughly as he did the children of the masters. He hardly ever spoke, and made most of his corrections with the flat of his own blade, swift, painful blows to Jarnolf's exposed wrist or undefended skull. But he gave fewer and fewer of these as time passed. As he grew out of childhood and toward manhood, Jarnolf felt himself to be living two lives: the dream life of his working hours and his true life, those hours spent defending himself against Shoka with shadow form and water form, then countering with one of the intricacies of attack. When he did well enough that the master would retreat from him with a slight smile, Jarnolf felt that he had found his true purpose in the world. What he only understood later was that Denabi Seshoka had not taken an interest in him as a person, but as an object to be trained. The old Hikidaya found great satisfaction in knowing that he could train even a mongrel pup, a mortal, to fight as well as the high-born children of his race. In a way, Jarnolf eventually came to realize he was no more real to the weapons master than a chunk of soapstone that a bored man whose great days had passed might carve into a fetish of a god or a likeness of a beloved hound. Jarnolf was not a person to Shoka, he was a pastime. But Jarnolf did not know that for a long while, and several years passed before he understood it. Years that were the best of his young life. Then, one day, the soldiers of the Hamaka came and took his sister Gret away. And that, I think, yes, that is where we are going to stop for the night. Oops. So let me put that on there for tomorrow night, and we'll get rid of that. And so let me just check in briefly to make sure. Yeah, it looks like people are still hearing it. So, actually, I see Mahmoud has made a comment. In another world, another reality, Tad wrote that archaeology book instead. No, I didn't write. I haven't written an archaeology book. I've done a lot of fake archaeology in my books, of course, as you all know. It's one of my many obsessions, are underground cities and forgotten civilizations and et cetera, et cetera. So it shows up a lot in my work. But one of the books that first got me really excited about being an architect was actually a book called Lost Cities and Vanished Civilizations. And it was written by Robert Silverberg, who, of course, is also an extremely well-known and very fine science fiction writer. Lives here in the Bay Area. It's somebody I get to see every now and then, and who I can't call a close friend because, my God, it's him, Robert Silverberg, Silver Bob, as I think, was it Isaac Asimov used to call him? But, he's like, he's a big figure in our field. But he knows me. I know him. I think he likes me. I certainly like him. It's one of the many great privileges of my life is to get to a point where I actually know people who wrote books that so thoroughly influenced me and set me off on my paths in life, although it was the book part rather than the archaeology part in Robert Silverberg's case. Anyway, so enough rambling. I rambled quite a bit tonight, and I rambled for part of the night, at least fortunately only about 4 minutes, with the microphone off, so I apologize for that. I've gone a little over to pay that back. And I thank you. I will be back tomorrow night. Later tonight, 7 p.m., of course, for those of you who can pop in, who are on a similar schedule. If not, of course, thanks, very many thanks to Mr. Chris Fab. These are available on YouTube. They're obviously also here on the page, I think, for quite some time. I don't think they've ever vanished, but they roll down out of sight somewhere. So, with all of that said, I thank you for joining me. Take good care of yourselves, your loved ones, people around you. That's a very important thing to do because we are in this together. I will see you later tonight, and if I don't, I will see you next week, I hope. And I hope you have a very good week, and I will talk to you soon. Peace. I'm out.